Welcome to day 2, part 2 of our workshop. The first one went really well, and the video is now up on Mouse House Gallery's website, along with our Facebook page if you want to refer back to any of the beginning topics. Today is basically just going over, I'm going to talk a little bit about what jot forms look like and why they're important to fill them out properly. I'm going to talk for a little bit, we'll take a little break, and then our jurors will arrive, start with their discussion. For those of you that weren't here for the first one, my name is Cheryl. I'm the owner of Mouse House Gallery, who is running this event. So, a little bit about jot forms. There are also, or call for entry submissions. There's a couple different sites that galleries will use. I particularly use jot form. Others might use a site called Entry Thingy. They're both kind of similar on the recipient side, so we'll just kind of go over a little bit why you want to be very detailed and follow the directions of what a jot form looks like or how to fill out a jot form properly. So I sent myself some jot forms. This one is going to be just kind of a basic, not very clear directions from the gallery as to what they want. But the reason why I have one that's very detailed is making sure you have the proper images and labeling, and then one that's not, because sometimes some of these organizations might just give you something that's very bare minimum without clear directions as to what they want and how that can look on the gallery side when they get it. So this one is just, I'm just going to put in my name. I'm just going to do a first name. I'm not going to put in an email or a phone number, because this happened to me where I had someone submit something but there's no way to contact them and I didn't know who they were or even how to accept their work because there was no clear definition. That's why I want to make this one really apparent as to why it's so important. And I'm just going to put this in. And so signing. Okay. Yay, it's been accepted. So when I get that submission, let's see if it works properly. So I want to show you what it looks like from when the gallery receives the submissions, because what I see is going to be a little bit different than what you will see. So it shows that I have something in my inbox. I'm going to go check it out. And this is all I see. My name is Cheryl. I see the image, but the signature I can't read. There's no contact information. I had this happen in a previous show, and I really wanted to accept the piece, but their signature was a line, and there's no contact. So I even tried to comment on their jot form to see if they would respond, and unfortunately they didn't, so I wasn't able to accept their work. And then, so that's a poor one, don't do that. If they have spots to input information, your name, your email, your phone number, do everything, regardless if they say it's required or not. That way, if something is missed, or let's say your images don't come through, they have a way to contact you in order to make sure your submission is actually counted. And then I'll show you what a good one looks like. So this next one is going to be more of what I send out for call for arts. So I ask for the artist's name. By artist name, I also mean what they prefer to go by. So if they have a different name that they go under for their artwork, a different alias, I want them to put that, not their given name, because more than likely that's how I'm going to make the labels from, is the name that they provide. So, and then I have an email. And phone number. You guys can see my awesome typing skills. So on here, I have 2 submissions. I have it right underneath the submission part, what I'm looking for from each entry. I prefer to have the artist's name, the title, the price, and the year. Most call for entries, though, are with a blind jury, so they don't necessarily want your name on the piece. I do it specifically because it's a show that I have invited certain artists to, and I'm trying to organize my files. And we'll learn more about blind juries from the jurors when they talk in a little bit. But that's why sometimes it's very important to look below the submission and make sure your files are labeled the way that the gallery is requesting them to be labeled. And then, so I have, oh my gosh. So on here, you can see that I have my name, the title of my piece, and then I don't have the title or the price or the year, but for what I was submitting, it worked well for that submission. And then, because signature line boxes suck, I don't really look at the signature. I just want to know that you actually did agree to the terms, so that's why the signature line is there. But that's why it's so important that you make sure your name, your email, and contact information is present, because that way, if I don't have that information and all I have is your signature, I can't necessarily read what it is, because I don't even know what that says, and it's my signature. So I'm going to sign that, and so there, go back into my side of it, and you'll see the newer. So then this one is a lot more clear. It has my name, email, and a way for me to contact if I had any questions, especially if for some reason, if the gallery requests a certain size limit or file size and it's not the proper size, I can email them and say I need a reduced file size because it's too large for just the jot form or the call itself. Usually a larger file is requested once your work is submitted, and they can put it in their brochures and advertisement in a proper manner. So, any questions on jot forms? Yes?
When you're putting your image in that box, should your entire image be seen in that box? Because I've had it both ways.
So, usually it's just going to be the thumbnail, so it should be whatever, like that was the image. If I were to pull that same image up from my desktop, it's going to look the same.
So you should see the entire thing that you want the juror to see. Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
At least from the side, I'm not sure how some of the other platforms work, that we can see if that comes up with the jurors or ask them during the question and answer if they see something different with the other entries or call for entry type websites. But I will see the entire image, yes. Yep. Any other questions? No? Okay. So that kind of wraps up the first part. I really just wanted to focus on the importance of making sure when you are applying for calls that you're putting as much information as possible to make it easy on both the juror and the gallery that's hosting the call to be able to contact you if need be, or if there's any errors. There have been sometimes, especially with jot form, where someone will go to hit the submission button and it'll say that there's an error and the form was not submitted properly. There's a way you can then contact the gallery to see if they got it and if they needed something else submitted. So usually, from when that has happened to me, I will still get the submission, but the images might not be there. So then I'll say, I got at least your signed consent, but I need your images. You can just email them here and it will be included in the pool for submissions. And also don't panic if you see that error message. It happens quite a bit. Sometimes it could just be also the time of day. If the internet, is really busy that day, sometimes it'll bog down the websites. But also if there's a fee and it says there's an error, don't submit again because it could have already gone through and you don't want to pay more than once. So that's when I would contact the gallery and be like, hey, I submitted, but I got an error message. Did my payment come through? If it does, but they didn't get your images, then they would find another way to contact you and get that all sorted out. So we're going to take a little break while our jurors arrive, and then we'll get started with the second portion of our event. So thank you. All right, I want to welcome everyone to part 2 of day 2 with our juror panel. If you missed the first part, I just kind of briefly went over importance of filling out JAT forms properly or submissions for calls properly and giving all of the proper information. The first part will be on our website once the video is edited. I'm trying not to make noise, I'm sorry. I want to thank my jurors for coming and participating and providing their insight. We have Anna, Chris, Michael, Clint, and Cheryl. Each juror will speak for a bit and on their background and answer some of their own personal questions and pet peeves that they might find as being a juror, and we'll go from there. I'm going to have Anna start first.
Hi, I'm Anna. I've been a practicing fine artist for about 15, 16 years. I'm mostly known for large format oil paintings. I've shown locally, nationally, and internationally with work in public and private collections all over the country. I also have worked in a curatorial capacity as well. I was the director of Gallery 454 for a very long time. Gallery 2987 for a very long time, an assistant curator at Gallery 454, in addition to starting my own curatorial organization called Things Feel Heavy, where I did independent curatorial exhibitions for galleries, art institutions, and museums, mostly here in Michigan. I've also worked in a consulting capacity with the city of Detroit, helping basically write art community expansion programs for the city's arts, culture, and entrepreneurship department. I also work as an NPPA photographer with the National Press Photography Association, doing a lot of photo documentation and activism work, and I'm also a tattoo artist. Because, it's not quite enough. So yeah, that's my background. Started, talking, I think, because curation is really what we're here to discuss. Started very much in an assistant capacity and worked my way up from there, and now still do a lot of the independent curatorial things, try to do a couple a year. So. Van Schaap. It's VAN space SCHAAP. Very Dutch.
So my name is Chris Schneider. I am also an artist and run a gallery called Hatch Art in Hamtramck. It's also known as Hatch Gallery. It's actually 3 separate spaces that we run. But first about me, I guess. So I grew up in Nebraska, taught high school for a while, came to this area to go to Cranbrook, got my MFA at photography, and ended up really liking the area. And so ended up staying here for the last 20-some years. going on 25 years now. I started this nonprofit organization called Hatch. The city sold us their old police station for $1, and so we spent 4 years renovating it. It was in very bad shape. And then now it's an art gallery with studios, workspace, a dark room, and we also own Hamtramck Disneyland, which is an outdoor art installation that's just got written up in the New York Times. Yeah. And so as an artist, I do mostly photography, but not exclusively. In fact, I have 26 sculpture pieces at the Janice Cherritt Gallery up in West Bloomfield right now. That sounds more impressive. That it's actually one big piece that's made of 26 individual pieces. No, I'll just say 26.
Yes, 26. You're very impressed.
Yes, that's true. And I've shown my work around even the world. I think my biggest show was I was in the Shanghai Biennial in China. But mostly I show around in this area, and I've done I've participated in a lot of juried shows. My gallery has put on a lot of juried shows, and I've been a jurist, I'm not really sure anymore, 3, 4, 5 times, something like that. So I've kind of experienced with all of that. So, yeah.
Hey, I'm Michael Ross. I have been a painter for about 15, 16 years. Well, I was before that too, but I took a 10-year hiatus in the aughts. But I'm a large-scale oil painter for the most part, abstract, sometimes figurative. I've got pieces all over the place. I'm also a muralist, and I run the Annex Gallery over at 333 Midland in Highland Park. I've been the lead curator, gallery director there for about 3 years now, unofficially for about 10 years. Yeah, I, coming from sort of a punk rock, art rock ethos, I guess sort of a DIY ethos. When I was playing in bands and everything, I would set up shows, festivals, things like that, and then that sort of led into, when I got back into the visual art world, the first show I think I ever curated was the first show that I was in, which was, I was moving, and so all the walls in my old apartment were empty. So I asked a few friends and myself, we all put art on the walls, and I guess you could technically say that was the first show I curated, and that was in 2010. And since then, I have curated more shows than I can count. Yeah, I guess that's it, as far as that goes.
Thanks. I'm Clinton Schneider, not Schneider. I am an artist, primarily a painter. I do a lot of landscapes, mostly. I think my kind of a genre that I made up is post-industrial landscape. So the Midwest has lots of post-industrial areas, so kind of like great ideas that lasted for a while and then didn't, and I kind of enjoy something about that space in between. So I still work with that. I do some sculptural things that tap into those same ideas for the most part. I don't have a lot of curatorial accolades like everyone else before me does as far as running anything or starting any of those. The first time I curated anything, I showed with the Suzanne Hilberry Gallery from 2000 till they closed in 2016. And I curated a couple of the shows. Me and Hazel Blake, who was the gallery manager. What a lot of times galleries will do in the summertime is they don't put on shows that they spend as much money on because people don't go as often. So we said, well, what if we curate and we wanted to involve friends and kind of more of the public, because she was showing a lot of out-of-state artists and kind of big blue chip things. So we got a lot of people involved for a couple of shows we called the Summer Pack shows. And I can talk more about that at some point if you're interested, but that was great. That was really interesting. We tried to make it, instead of the normal month or 5-week long run, we did 2 weeks with a group of, I think, 10 people each time, and then we had curated bands and things like that. So it was a real event, and trying to really get people to come there, but also kind of help our friends and people we cared about get into, a gallery space. I've done a couple other shows, but not a ton. The most recent was at Janice Cherick last January, and I curated a show that took me about a year. I knew about it for a year, and it took me about a year to really curate. And that one I kind of went through. I had an idea, and I really picked people that I thought really fit that idea. But mostly what I do with any kind of curatorial or juror things is I tend to, about twice a year, someone calls. And in fact, right now, this week coming up, I'm doing the Birmingham Women's Society's, I'm getting it all wrong. Birmingham Society of Women. Thank you. If there's a sculpture, so I'm jurying a show that they have coming up, and this will be the third time I juried a show for them, and I'll talk about that later too, but how those go. But I do a lot of those. That's kind of a bigger one, but I've done some real small community ones, so I kind of see, like I don't know, I've been out to what I would say the sticks, like far away outside of the metro area to do shows where they have a group, and I'll get to see some of the same people, but I could talk about more of that. But I think that's it.
I submitted to that show. The Birmingham group.
I'll see it on Tuesday.
I'm Cheryl Barill, and it's funny, as I was listening to you guys down there talking about your histories, I thought I'm kind of the accidental juror / curator. And literally, I started in the 80s, and I happened to be with some friends. They had a gallery in New York, and we were all there. And I was there for some other business, and their juror ended up not being able to make it. So they looked around and they said, like, well, you can do it. And so I ended up doing it. And this piece of that story I'm going to talk about later as well. I've done a little bit of jurying locally that I can address and tell some, like inside scoop and stories and give some value here. And then also my ex-husband was one of the teachers at BBAC, and I would see his students evolving and developing, and as they became more and more ready to do what I called leave the art center, I was curating space at the New York Life Insurance corporate offices in Southfield. So I had this space, and I had basically an ongoing show for about 3 years. And every 3 months, I would invite the next group of students who were ready. And then it started to expand because, as we all want, we all want more opportunities to show our work. And it was an absolute thrill to be able to help people get past like this whole imposter symptom thing, which honestly I was starting to feel as you guys were all talking. So just to say, it's like when you start submitting your work, that can pop up at the oddest times, no matter where you are on your journey.
Welcome, jurors. Glad that you all are here wrestling. I'm going to ask a couple questions to start. A couple of our jurors will speak first. We'll take a little break, and then we'll finish with a few more of the jurors speaking. So this is going to start with Anna, Chris, and Michael. Whoever wants to start first can, but kind of go through your process of when you were a juror and things you looked for, how you selected pieces, anything specific that maybe the gallery had asked you of when picking pieces, and kind of your process in that part. Same with being a curator, what you look for specifically when picking pieces for shows.
Me. So, that's true. So, ordinarily the shows that I curate at the Annex, essentially, as I was just saying to Cheryl earlier, I'll look at our calendar and we've got like, oh, here's a month-long hole in the calendar here. Okay, so I'll start planning for that, usually about 3 to 6 months in advance. And I mean, my process is kind of like it's pretty casual. I guess you'd say, I go to shows and I look at Instagram and whatever, and I always have sort of a running list of artists whose work I really like. And once I sort of get an idea for what the show is going to be or how I want it to look or whatever, I'll select, anywhere from 3 to 6 or 10 artists whose work kind of fits in that mold. And really, to me, kind of the fun thing about putting together shows, because I love putting together shows, is sort of taking artists whose work is pretty disparate from each other and making it all work. It's got to sort of have I don't know what the word is, like a psychological resonance for me. And curating those shows, arranging those shows can be a lot of fun and pretty rewarding, seeing how different artists' work looks together on the walls. As far as jurying shows, I've really, at the Annex, I've only done one ever open call that was like an open call, and had, I don't know, hundreds of submissions, and it was great, and it was a lot of work, but it's fun, you know, looking at all these things that people had submitted, and in this particular case, it was kind of comical because I was starting to really formulate this show that was going to be great in my mind. I don't know how relevant all of this is to the subject at hand, but I had like a, I don't know, 6 or 8 person show that was going to be this fantastic show. And then, I don't know if anyone here knows Sean Haggis. He said, let's fill up the gallery with my inflatables. And I was like, so that ended up being the show. But it was great because from that one open call, then I had like this huge backlog of artists whose work I had not seen before, and who have since been in subsequent shows that I've put together. So maybe that's in a way to say, even if you don't get into a show that you've submitted for, it's never a bad idea, because, you know, then you're in the gallerist's mind for maybe a next show.
Me? Okay. All right, so I'm going to give you an illustration first. So I also teach, I forgot to mention that. And right now I teach at OCC, and I have 2 classes, and they just put on a student show. And I take each class down to the show, and we look at all the work, and then I have them vote on best of show. And then as a class, they decide like who gets best of show. And then the other class comes in, they have no idea what the first class did. The other class comes in and they do the same thing. And every single time, I can count on this being the lesson, their choices are never the same, and they hardly even overlap. Like their finalists, their top ones, hardly overlap with the other class. And so, you know, what Mike was saying is that, you know, getting your stuff out there is about getting in the show, yes, but it's also getting your name to be known, because you don't know how the jurying is going to come out. It's a little bit of a crapshoot, a little bit. I mean, there's things you can do, of course, we're talking about that. You can improve your chances. But, you know, ultimately it comes down to a lot of factors that are out of your control. And the results would be radically different if it was Mike and if it was myself or it was Anna, or, you know. And it's not like one of us is better at jurying than another. We just have different views. So you got to keep that in mind. The second thing I would mention is that getting into jurying shows is great. Being curated into a show is really what you're looking for. And that being curated into a show is by getting yourself known to the people who curate shows. And how do you do that? Well, you go to their galleries. You respond on social media. You post your things and make sure that people see it. You know, you get your work out there into juried shows, but also meet the jurist. You know, so it's networking, but I mean, that's a little bit how it works. You know, similarly, I just curated 2 shows. So at Hatch right now, if I can make the pitch, we have this really fun show called The Game Show. Runs to December 8th, so you have plenty of time to see it. I forgot to bring cards. But it's all work based off of games. Gameplay, parts of games, it's an actual game, whatever, sports. So it's supposed to be a fun, lighthearted show. And so that show was half curated and half an open juried call. So how do I know who to curate in? Well, it's going to be people I've seen over the last year, 2, 3 years, either online or in person. I'm like, that person makes some really interesting work, and I know that they've involved, you know, sports somehow. And so some people complain and say, oh, well, curators just pick who they know. Well, yeah, it's who we've experienced. It's not always our friends, it's just people we've experienced. And how do we experience them? Either you're coming into my gallery, I'm seeing your work at another gallery, or possibly I've seen your work online. You know, that's the main thing. So, does that sound good?
Yeah, I can't like reiterate enough how many important points Chris just made in terms of, and also going back to what Cheryl said, like the imposter syndrome. And I know for a lot of artists, especially if you're starting out and you're just trying to get your work into shows, you can take it really hard. You're going to get a whole heck of a lot more no's before you start getting yeses, and that can be really discouraging. So one of the other things I also do a lot of guest lectures with like colleges and universities. And in fact, I get to do one at U of M coming up, my alma mater. It's on Tuesday, so I'm very excited and nervous. And there's always a fine line between talking to young artists about sort of the realities of this industry, because that's what it is, but you want to kind of prepare them without crushing them completely right off the bat. And so one of the things I always like to talk about, going back to what Chris said, is so much of the yeses you get has as much to do with the quality of your work as it does with the curator itself. Like my personal work, the large oil paintings I do, are very feminist in base. They address like femme representation, both from an art historical and a contemporary viewpoint about women and women's bodies and how they're represented in art. And I'm gonna tell you, I get a lot more yeses from female curators than I do from male curators. And I think that doesn't need any more explaining. Like women see something they relate to, and when it's a female curator, she feels more, and that's not to say I don't get yeses from men, but Chris is a perfect example. But yeah, and I've just sort of realized over time, like, okay, because it has a lot to do with how the work speaks to an individual. And just in the way you walk into a gallery and you can look at art and go, that really speaks to me and that doesn't, somebody else with a completely different life experience is going to go into the same gallery and say, that piece really speaks to me and that one doesn't. Curators aren't any different, we're people too. So when we're during shows, like it a lot of times just comes down to like what work is speaking to us, but also a lot of times has to do thematically with the exhibition proposal itself. Like I know a lot of open calls do have themes to them. So it's really important when you're submitting work to make sure your work actually has some resonance with that theme. I get it, especially from a lot of young, eager artists, that they really just want to get their work out there. So they're kind of going for like the gunshot approach, just sending work to everything they can find. And that approach is just going to get you a lot of no's and be really discouraging. Like make sure when you're submitting pieces, you're submitting work that has to do with the actual theme proposed. And you'll have a lot better chance of getting in. And also, I think there's different ways that curatorial shows happen. Like a lot of them are, as Chris said, a lot of them are sort of like selected, like the artists you select to be in a show, and that is all about networking. I can't even tell you the entire career I do have now, both as a curator and an artist, all came out of going out there and saying yes to everything. Like every opportunity that came, I said yes to everything, even if unless it is like a compromise of your work or your integrity in some way, never say no, because you have no idea what the next connection is going to be. Just as an example, like, it's a big honor. I get to go do this lecture at U of M, and those lectures all started because I started curating exhibitions with Things Feel Heavy. One of the artists I put in one of my shows at one point was a professor at Macomb Community College. They had this incredible guest lecture series where they invite, youngish artists, like establishing career artists, to come in, do a solo show, lecture, do like a big community-wide lecture. It was the students and the community at large. And that was the first time I got to go in and do like a paid-for big lecture on a really big scale. And then once you kind of have these things on your resume, people are like, oh, you're capable of that. So once you've kind of proven you can do this or that, you get more and more opportunities come down the pipeline for doing those kinds of things, and that snowballs into more shows, more lectures, everything. So one of the things I constantly tell artists at any stage in their career is never say no, and networking is the very best thing you can do. When you go to a show, like, this is, I think, probably the hardest part for artists to really internalize is because we're all weird and awkward and, you know, non-communicative a lot of times, but you need to learn, one, how to talk about your work. The best thing you can do is be able to quickly and efficiently speak about what your work is about. So you don't want to rattle, you know, a curator's, you know, you don't want to just prattle on and take a lot of their time, but if they come up and they're talking to you, like, you want to be able to effectively speak about the work, especially the work in your in the show. So kind of have something pre-planned you would like to say about it in case you do get the opportunity to talk about it. And then lastly, go find the curator. If they put you in the show, they like your work, go find the curator. Like, I don't know what it is, but especially with younger artists, I'll have them come up and be like, oh, I was so intimidated to talk to you. And I'm like, I am a golden retriever. I don't know why anybody would feel that way. So I love it when the artists that I put into shows actually do come up and talk to me a little bit, you know, just say thanks for being in the show, maybe bring up another piece in the show you really like, this is really interesting, or this is, you know, just kind of start a conversation. I guarantee you, you will stay in that curator's mind for years to come, and the next time they are, you know, handpicking artists for shows, you're going to be on the list. So.
Let me lead on to that.
It's not my mic.
Yeah. Is, you know, when being ready to talk about your work, the thing that turns me off is when somebody wants to show me their work, great, you have my attention, and they pull their phone out and they spend 2 minutes flipping through trying to find the right image. You just blew your opportunity. You know, you better really have some great work at that point, because you've just buttonholed me for 2 minutes at something where I could be like talking to other people and such. So, you know, have a website with your work at the ready, have an Instagram with a separate page for your art. You know, just be prepared that way. Don't make us suffer.
Yeah, that's another really good point Chris just made. One of the things I tell young artists starting out, and this goes for all artists in my opinion, social media is your very best friend in this art market. Like, back when I started curating, everybody had to have a website. If you didn't have a website, you were a nobody. So you had to have a website, and you had to have like bought in your, you know, artist name for that website. It couldn't be a like at Squarespace like you need to have it's like yourname.com. Now I can tell you half of the time I don't even go to an artist's website. I go right to their Instagram, and here's why. I want to know their process, especially if it's come down to like the process for me in selection is I'll go through all of the work that's been submitted, especially if it's an open call, and I'll set all of the absolute yeses aside. Like, this piece is incredible, this is for sure in the show. And then I'll set all of the no's aside, like when we can get into what qualifies as a no. And then I'll always have a pile of maybes. And the maybes are where I actually spend the most time looking at the artist, you know, what their bios, their submissions, their statements, and then I usually go to their social media because I want to see, one, how their work is being put together. I kind of want to see those processes, and I want to see how they talk about their work on a very personal level instead of the very formal statements that get submitted. I want to see the way that they are speaking about their work. And then I want to see how it's actually being made, and that is what social media is so great for, like giving progress shots, giving updates, giving images in your studio, making things. Again, it's hard to talk about because we want to live in an ideal world where art and artists, it's such a beautiful thing. No, it's a business. It's a business. And if you want to do this, you need to take it seriously like a business. And marketing is part of a business. You're not just selling your work, you are selling yourself. You're selling your image as an artist. Thanks to Andy Warhol, who basically commodified artists as, in their own right, unfortunately. You have to think about how you sell yourself as well. And how that is being portrayed. So have your social media, be really active on it, be showing progress things on your work, and please, for God's sake, have a social media that is for your art and art only. Like, I don't want to see pictures of things you made for dinner posted, or like pictures of like you at the Ren Fair with your boyfriend. Like, I want to see your art. Like, make it a, like, your art Instagram should be an art Instagram. And like, yes, your life can filtrate into that in ways, or like use your stories that, you know, like, oh, this is what I did for a weekend. Like, I'm a human too. But make sure the grid, like what everybody is seeing constantly, is a snapshot of the work you're doing and who you are and how you represent yourself as an artist. And then it's really easy when you get a curator's attention for a minute, you just flip to your Instagram and they can see, you know, 30 posts right there of you busy working, and here's how you're talking about your work, and here's final progress shots, final images of the work. And we get a really, really, really quick and good glimpse about your working process. So
I will third that as well. I think we all can probably be fairly irritated and ambivalent about social media most of the time, but for art, it is pretty invaluable. Like I think all of us have now said, like a lot of times the way we find artists in the first place is just through Instagram, whatever. I would say mostly Instagram. And you know, when you find galleries that you like or curators that you think would like your work or not or whatever, follow them, and then chances are that is going to prompt them to look at your work, and then maybe they'll follow you back, maybe they'll put you in a show.
And one last thought on that is that a lot of us know each other, right? And so, you know, I might tell Mike, hey, I got this show coming up, which I do, on coping. And then, you know, Mike might say, hey, have you seen this person's work? You know, or you got to check this person out, because we definitely talk, and we help each other out. One thing I love about the Detroit art scene is it's not a dog-eat-dog place. Mike's gallery is doing great. Awesome. I'm happy, you know. And he's same with me, you know. We're not trying to hog all the artists and not share it. So, yeah, so the flip side is if you get a bad reputation with one curator, they might be like, stay away from this. You don't want to work with that artist. Yeah, and trust me, we like good art. We love great art. We also love great art with artists that are a pleasure to work with. Not high maintenance, not demanding, not difficult. Yeah.
Are you thinking of anyone in mind right now?
Oh,
yeah,
well,
I am.
There's John, and there's Mary, and there's
Yeah, I think that's especially true in Detroit, which is a very small art scene, small world kind of art scene. I mean, it's a huge art scene because there is a ton of great work and a ton of great artists, but everybody, they all seem to know each other, and especially the gallerists and curators, for sure.
So can you give examples of like difficult, like how they can be difficult?
The first and biggest one for me dealing with it is artists that are just really hard to get a hold of. Like, everybody's busy, but usually curators are, you know, I know a lot of us are doing curation on the side of like entire jobs, businesses, our own art practices. So, you know, there's not like all of the time in the world to do it. And so when you're like, hey, I need responses by Friday, like I need to know who's dropping off their pieces on what days, and if anybody can't do this, I need to know before Thursday. And inevitably I'll get someone on, you know, Friday night that's like, oh, I can't make it. And it's like, well, that's your problem, you know? So people that are really hard to get a hold of, don't communicate quickly and effectively, I think are the biggest ones for me. But then also, I'm trying to think of, off the top of my head, like someone who has a bad reputation and why. I guess like it shouldn't be that surprising, but artists that are really egotistical, I just don't prefer to work with them, because again, this is, you know, I think everyone here has reiterated it. The Detroit art scene, the very best thing about it, and the worst thing about it also is it's very insular. Everybody knows everybody, and I think all of us want each other to do well. There's a place in the world for everyone's work, and there, you know, when you're in this community, this is our community. These are our people. Like, you want to see them succeed as much as you want to see yourself succeed. And sure, there are times you're like, oh damn, I applied for that and didn't get it, but like, good for him, you know. But and that's okay. That's a human response. But when you show up places and you have like a big ego about who you are and what you've accomplished, I think the thing I have found the most is the people that brag the least about what they've done are usually the most accomplished about anybody. So if you come in with a big attitude and you're really braggadocious, it usually to me is like, it's like a chihuahua barking its head off. You know, I'm like, okay, good for you, you know. So yeah, I think those are like the big issues, like being hard to communicate with them, not being timely in responses, and then having an attitude about their work.
I've had artists. I have a lot of artists on my blacklist. I don't mention who they are publicly, but they've done certain things. I'm like, I'm done with you. Sometimes it's like you got to be careful what you say, because they will. It's an ego thing. They'll say something about my gallery, like, what did you just say? You know, why are you telling? You know. So they'll like say, oh, Hatch, that's a cute little gallery. What? It's, okay, you know, all right, well then you're too good for me. Good. I won't show you. You have better places to go. Go ahead and go there. You know, so yeah, that's just that's getting into the ego thing. But also, even when I get you in, when you're in a show, you know, you're following through with what the curator asked. Are you getting us the information that we asked, the title information? Are you getting the piece when you on time? You showing up? I get a lot of flakes, and that just is more work for me. You know, you don't show up on my designated time. Now I got to take time out of my day to meet you at the gallery, so you can do what you couldn't do when everybody else did it. It's just little things like that. We have a big juried show every April called Hatchback. I'm just plugging my gallery stuff, which the call goes out in early February. It's a great show to get in. We take like 40 artists. And every year there's about 3 artists that don't drop off on time and don't pick up their work at the end. So now I'm storing your stuff. And every day that you're not picking up, or every week you're not picking up, I'm like, there's your name. Oh, that person's still not picking up their stuff. So you're just digging yourself deeper and deeper, right? So make our lives easy, you know, and then we'll feel good about you. So.
I do have a question though. If when you're starting out, like you said, get to know the curator. So how is that done? Is that the person that owns the gallery? Is it a separate person? How do you get to know them? If you answer a call and it says curated by so-and-so, and okay, if you get in, if you don't, you'll never know that curator. So, I mean, how do you get those relationships? Besides you guys that, you know, we met you today. But
I would say go to the opening. Go to the opening and yeah, even if you didn't get in.
Go if you didn't get in, because also it'll teach you a really good thing maybe about why you didn't get in. Like, I have gone to shows where I was really disappointed, you know, I didn't get in, and I went to the show and I saw the work and I was like, oh no, I get it. Like, my work doesn't fit in with this. Like, it fit thematically, but like what was selected, it really would have been like a very sort of intrusive piece in this selection of things. And that's another way to make yourself feel a little bit better. Like, you kind of explain to yourself why you got that no. But if you'll always see the name of the curator. Like, you know, if it's either the director of the gallery themselves is curating, or they've had a guest curator come in, they're always going to tell you curated by so-and-so. Google them, find their picture, know what they look like, find their social media, and then find them at the show.
Yeah, and you can introduce yourself. Maybe don't be like, why didn't I get into this show? But, you know, maybe next time, you know, whatever.
First of all, when you don't get in a show, don't be sour about it, and make sure you go to the show. The point about, like, having work not get into a show and you're wondering why. When you see the show, there was one time I didn't get in to a show, and I was like, how could that be? You know, my work was perfect for what the theme was. And I reached out to the curator of the show. He wasn't the juror. There was a panel of 6 jurors. And I said, you know, I'm just interested, I'm just wondering if you will help me understand why my piece didn't get in. We had a phenomenal conversation. It was all done by email at first, and then he offered to call me. So when you ask and you're earnest and you want to grow, and you want to use the fact that you didn't get into the show as an opportunity to grow as an artist. It's not a time to, you know, like take 30 seconds to lick your wounds. And the longer you've been getting rejections or no, your work is not chosen, it's you know, like lick your wounds for a minute and then take a look at your artwork and ask yourself, from a juror's point of view, like look at it from a mirror on the other side of the room or something. Become as objective to your own work as you can and ask yourself honestly, how can I make this better? Is that a direction that I want to grow? Because as a juror, a lot of times, and I'm skipping the order, but this is, I think, such a hot topic. As a juror or a curator, and it's really the same, we are looking for something that, or at least often I am, I want to know that the artist has mastered their material. That's not the same as like somebody can work on a painting and you can work on it for 30 minutes and it is amazing. You can work on a piece of work for 30 days and it's amazing. It depends on your mastery of the material and how much you are in your flow of creativity and where you're at in terms of your evolution. So every single show, I can speak as like that artist who's like, like wanting to be known. Every time you show your work, it's not like, oh, I'm hot stuff. Oh, people are starting to know my name. It's like always a constant growth of, wow, that's really nice. How can I elevate? Because it's never about getting there. And the process, you can like really get beaten up and feel rejected. It's not a rejection, it's a call to grow. It's not always about knowing the juror or the curator. There's a lot of times where it's an absolute blind call. An instant no for me is if somebody's photo isn't proper. A lot of times a call for art will tell you what size JPEG. Make sure you learn how to do that. And if you don't know how to do it, the gentleman who's sitting in back will teach you, right? Or he'll do it for you.
Oh.
So make sure your photos are proper quality. Because if the call for art is on the computer and we're looking at JPEGs, if it doesn't look right, it's an instant no. And it might have nothing to do with the artwork. It'd have to do with your photography. So make sure you're really tight on that.
That's a great segue. Cheryl, thank you for bringing that up. I actually wanted to ask Anna and Chris, you've both been jurying shows for quite a while. What you look for, how often you've been in blind juries or jurying shows where you know the artists, or it's like a private call, and kind of your process with that, which type of calls you prefer, and any difficulties that you have in both sections, whether it's blind juries or ones where you're the curator, and like with the game show, Chris.
I mean, I prefer to curate my own shows without an open call. Because then I can really be selective and go out and cherry pick, all this art that I know is out there, or these artists that I know do great work. And I'm not saying my friends know that this is different. We're talking about people we know of, not people we are friends with. Okay, so we're not asking you to like kiss up and, tell us how great we are and Facebook friend us and all this stuff.
On Facebook?
But blind jurying, I really enjoy a lot because then that's my opportunity to expand my horizons on who's out there and who's doing what. That's the main reason we have our big hatchback every year. It's actually, this is the secret, it's my research into 250 artists that I didn't know before. This is honest truth. The jurists I always invite somebody in to jury it, and then I go through all the work myself, and I find the artists that I'm interested in. A lot of times they weren't included in the show, but I like their work, and so I'll reach out to them and I'll say, hey, I'm doing a group show, or sometimes, rarely, as a solo show even. But I guess that's what I wanted to mention too, is that there's juried shows, there's getting curated into shows, there's getting curated into small group shows, and then there's the solo show. And it's all a process, and very rarely do you really get to skip steps with an individual curator. It does happen, but very rarely do you go from, I just met you, let's give you a solo show. It's usually I got to know you in a juried show, I curated you into a show, everything went well. Wow, you're just blowing it out of the park every single time. Let's get you. I want to do a solo show with you. That was actually exactly what happened with you.
Yeah, but funny enough, you saying that. So when I was younger, starting out, I had submitted to a couple of the hatchback shows, and I'd gotten no's. I think maybe twice or 3 times. I had not gotten into the hatchback shows. So, and again, he was not the actual juror on it. He was not the one curating. But it was funny because to me, I was like, oh yeah, that hatch gallery, I can never get into it. Da, da, da. And then one day we both ended up on a panel that Embrace Creatives was doing that was also helping like artists, like we were giving like portfolio reviews, for artists. And it was like an all-day thing, and we got to like break for lunch, and we just connected right away, great conversation. And at this point, like I obviously knew who he was, and I had been to a lot of shows at Hatch and loved like the things he was doing and putting together. And then I think it was like a Scarab Club show we were both in. And we ended up having a great conversation, and that's where it was like, oh yeah, let's get you into a solo show. So, that I think again, it's really important not to take the no's to heart, because I got no's from the people he had hired to curate, but I got a solo from him. So, and sometimes it just goes that way. But sorry, what was the original question? Just backtracking. I'm paying attention, I swear. Blind jury. Okay, yeah. So the processing, I think also I kind of want to do a distinction here between blind juried shows, open calls, and then selective shows, like where we go and pick like piecemeal the artists we want into the shows. So blind jury, from what I always understand it, is where we literally just see the work. So here's like the call for art, the theme, if there is a theme, the work is submitted, and you're just looking at, it's maybe sometimes you get their name, sometimes you don't, and you're going purely solely off of the images you're seeing of the work submitted. Open call shows, usually, at least when I've done it, I get to see the work, I get to see their names, their artist statements, if they have social media, so I get everything up front. And the way that I like to curate when that comes in is I do start with the images first. So your image is your most important thing. Like getting back to what Cheryl said, good images of your work is worth time investment. Stop sending me pictures of your artwork from your cell phones, okay? Get a camera. Everybody knows somebody with a camera. Hire a photographer for an hour. And get really nice images of your work really high quality images that you can shrink down into more compact JPEGs, and then follow the instructions of the submission. Like if it says we only want JPEGs, you know, of this size, and please attach them to, you know, the email, or attach them to this, like the amount of times I would say like, yeah, please attach it to the email, and then have an artist like plop it right into the body of the email. When you do that, I can see about like this many pixels of it, because it's a giant image in an email, so I'm seeing like the top corner of the painting, and I have to like zoom my whole computer out. Like if it's taking me extra time where I can't just like swipe through and look at things right off the bat, that usually is going to be like, well, I'm not going to say it's an automatic no, because every once in a while there's a piece that was just so phenomenal I can't say no to it, but it's going to put you in the maybe pile right off the bat. Like you're not going to get into the absolute yeses right from that. So make sure you're following the directions, make sure the pictures are great. And then with selected shows, yeah, I think we've talked about that enough. Like again, that just comes from networking, from and also knowing other artists. Like when you are out at shows, talk to anybody you can. And also, you know, there's always, if you're in a, you know, multiple artist show, like there's always a release with the names of the artists. Like go Google them, take 20 minutes before the opening and like look their names up. Go to their social media so you know what they look like. You're like, one, you might really love some of the work, and then great, now you've got somebody to go talk to at the show. Because again, you never really know like who's who and what's doing what. Like I show up as an artist to the shows I'm curated into. Half the time other artists that are in that show, they'd have no idea that I also curate. They have no idea that I'm walking around like looking at work to be like, oh, I'm gonna follow that person and that person. I really like that person's work. And every once in a while I'll have an artist that's also just in the show with me come up and be like, oh, I love your work, da da da. And like I'll make a connection there. And again, that just like goes into the mind bank of artists like I want to talk to later, look at their work more later. And so talk to everybody. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, the curator itself. If that's like a little bit intimidating off the bat, just talk to the other artists, because you never know what they're up to. And all of us usually are doing multiple things, I think. So.
Great, thank you guys. We're gonna take about a 5-10 minute break, get some stretcher legs, bathroom, water, and then we're gonna come back and hear from Clinton and Cheryl for a few things. And yeah. All right, welcome back from break. So this second part, Clinton and Cheryl are gonna speak a little bit more in depth, and I do have an extra mic, so if our other jurors have any insight, they can add into it. Okay, just kidding. So Clinton and Cheryl, if you could kind of focus on, if you can remember back to when you were first asked, how that process was. I remember during our first part of the workshop, several people asked, how did you become a juror? Why did you become a juror? And kind of that process. And then also, if you can kind of focus in on when you've been selecting pieces, what are automatic yeses? That you're like, yes, this is definitely in the show. And besides the image quality, other things that are absolute no's.
You're looking at me to start.
I'm just asking.
Okay.
Your choice.
All right.
Your choice.
I'm happy to. I'm chatty.
Sonny and Cher thing. And
Da,
just
da, da, da. You're going to notice a lot of similar themes, and you know, like it's not to tune it out when you hear it as a repetition. It underscores how true it is. The very first time I was asked to curate or jury, I mentioned already, it was in the 80s. I was pretty young. I was painting abstract at the time. I had come out of grade school drawing and painting realistically. I found it very boring, and I went into abstract for a number of years. I also realized I didn't mention, I work with oil. I'm a painter. I work with a lot of gold leaf as well. I regard it as a color. I'm a colorist. So let's just kind of fill in the blank there. So when I very first was asked to jury, it really was an accident. And I want to say that, you know, like what I did as an accidental jurist is very different than how I jury work or curate now. Now I don't care what style it is. It can be abstract, it can be photorealistic, it can be representational, it can be impressionistic, it can be collage, it could be, you know, whatever. I'm looking for if somebody has a mastery. So when I'm looking at the work, or sadly, I actually don't like using JPEGs because I don't care how good the photo is, it doesn't give you the same experience. And I think that that's something I really wish we could revisit as a profession, because you look at something as a JPEG and size matters. You know, like I always think of small things as being more of a poem and something larger as being a fuller story. And a smaller piece will draw you physically in closer to look at it properly. It has a closer, more intimate range. It doesn't mean that a larger painting's not more intimate, but the physical experience is very different. And looking at the JPEGs, you cannot read that at all. So when I work with a lot of jurors. I'm a member of Lawrence Street Gallery, and I'm also involved in shows with the Birmingham Society of Women Painters.
And sculptors?
BizWhip. No sculptor, that's just the Detroit group. So I work with jurors, and there's lots of times where I will ask the juror, you know, how comfortable are you making sure almost everybody gets one piece in? We have a tremendous amount of space at this venue, and because, you know, if it's for the Birmingham group, I think it's lovely to be able to ask a juror, you know, can you try to get something from everybody unless it compromises the show? So jurors are often given instruction by a curator or a gallery owner. I think I'm getting off track here a little bit, but
That's good
one of the other things that happens in terms of sometimes you may not get accepted because you got into the yes pile and you got into the maybe pile, and the maybe pile grew into some of the pieces went into the yes. And then the gallery owner will come and say, we don't have room for 5 of those. We literally had that happen at a show at BBAC. We had it happen, I juried a show at Lawrence Street before I was a member. It was a very strong show. It was body eclectic. The 2 of us juried it, and we worked together. We had our criteria that we agreed on that we were going to be looking at. And then we got to the point where it was like, well, we had it kind of laid out. Sometimes during a show, you also begin the curating process, whether you're asked to or not. It's just a natural thing to look for pieces that will make a coherent show, so you don't end up with a couple of things that are lovely pieces, but they really don't fit in the show. And again, that's just to like reiterate, if you do not get into a show, go to the show, and there will be times where you'll be like, oh my God, I'm so glad mine didn't show in this because it would have looked terrible. It wouldn't have shown my work well. So you have to take that into consideration. And I'm going to give it to you. I don't know.
I've done a lot of the ones we're talking about, I think, like the blind jury where you don't know who it is, you're just given the JPEGs. But I want to kind of make a parentheses. The last show that I curated, and the difference was the gallery said, we want you to curate a show. They didn't say what the theme was, and so I thought for a bit about it, and I came up with a theme, eventually a title, which I called Beyond Topography. So I already said I make these urban landscapes, and I'm really interested in it. I feel like it's the window to understanding where we live, and the window I have, that's what I'm focusing on. But I know that's not the only one, and I think looking at the landscape is really important. So I wanted to have a show that had the widest amount of voices and perspectives that I could come up with. So there were a handful of people I knew, like I'll name Tylon Sawyer, was doing these amazing AI portraits. He called Detroit Blacktopia, or Detroit 3000 Blacktopia, which was AI-assisted photograph-looking things where, if you could imagine, like this utopia where there were only black citizens and only and it was just this beautiful vista and somewhat not space age, but in the future, futurish looking, and they're really incredible, and they really did something for me. So that was kind of like, all right, that I knew I didn't know he would do it, but I knew that was one end of something I wanted to do. And I had a few other people in mind, sort of tracing roughly a circle around. And as I asked people to be in, and I tell them what the idea was, occasionally people would say, "Oh, do you know this?" And either I did or I didn't, but I'd look into it. Sometimes I'd say, "Oh, that's perfect," and I wanted enough voices. So I didn't make an open call. I wanted to be selective, but I was actively asking people who else they thought might be really good. And I wanted to have a lot of breadth to the show and cover as many things that were outside of my own perspective. So that was great, and it really stretched me into places that I had to research more and do. It took a long time to do that show. Really, on the opposite end of the spectrum is what I most often do with someone. Like recently, they'll say, "Will you curate our new show?" Like the Birmingham Society of Women Painters doesn't usually have a theme. It's more like a seasonal thing or something like that. So they're not asking me to choose a theme or look at things by the theme. It's just here's the group. One of the very first ones I did, which is way back to the original question, was there was one in Grosse Pointe and also this the Women Painters group. I can't remember which was which, but this was long enough ago that it was in person. There wasn't digital work that we were looking at, and that's the way I did it. But I find that I'm really overly empathetic. Like I teach as well. I didn't say that before, but I want my students to succeed. When I see they have a spark or there's something, I want to draw that out, and I want to help them get to the best place they can get. And when I'm jurying work, a lot of my heart goes out into it. I want everyone to win. I want somebody to succeed. But a gallery will tell you, we've got this many spaces. So it might be, we can fit, they'll tell you a number. They might say 67 pieces. We've done this a million times, 67 pieces. And I might have 200 things that I have to go through. So already I have to make cuts. I know I have to do that. But what I'll do is, when it was in person, I'd kind of put these things over there and put those things over there, and I would be there for hours. And it was, so I like that it can actually be digital now, but I agree, it's not the same the way we're looking at only digital work. But I would never choose winners without seeing it in person. So the way it goes mostly is we get a big batch of things, and I will make a yes, maybe a no folder, essentially. And there's a few that I'm like 100% yes, 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 and a handful that are like, no, I don't think so. Well, why the no's? They might not just fit the theme. Sometimes the quality isn't there. Sometimes reasons that have already been said. But there's not too many of those. Like I said, I'm pretty empathetic. So the maybe list is huge, and then there's those other ones. So then I'll go through that list again, and I'll go, well, okay, I still have room in the yeses, so I'll throw a few more over there, and I just kind of winnow it down between those two piles. And after a while, I'll be honest, I can spot, we're not supposed to do this, but this is what I do. I can see, like, okay, this person has 3 things. I know their style. I can see it's the same person that did this. So I'll say, all right, that person has 2. Let's get this other person in there, even though, I'll try to get people in there. Given that it's a group show, like I know, like, the people in the Birmingham Society of Women Painters, they're not after each other. It's a group. So I'm trying to get as many people as I can, and I'm trying to represent what that group looks like as much as possible. So I try to be pretty generous with who gets in and who doesn't, for the most part. But what I'm actually looking for personally, what I want to see, because some of it might be, honestly, I've done some things where it's like, none of this is work I necessarily would hang. I'm asked to curate a show. There might be a lot of sailboats and flowers or something like that. I'm just trying to use something that's generic. But after a while, they look very similar, and how are you supposed to go through that? What I really look for in work isn't actually technical prowess as much as that somebody is telling me something, that I can feel that person in it. Even if it's not as strong as some of the other work, that I can really feel a voice. If it's really strong work, it's probably going to be in there, but it might not be my top pick, especially if somebody's again and again hitting the same mark with these shows, but I don't feel growth in the work, even though it's well done, but I don't know what they're telling me. Like that doesn't rank as high as something that might be not as technically there, but I think I said it, but so all of that goes into the factor. Now, a lot of times after I go through and do the show, they'll say, we've got the opening this night and you can come there. And I, for years, never did it because I didn't want to meet somebody that said, why didn't I get in there? I didn't want to face it, but the last 5 times I've done it, and the first one was at Lawrence Street. It was a small work show, and I went there and I just said, you know what? Let's meet everybody. Let's see who it is. And I have amazing ability. People told me this, but just from teaching, I think someone will say, "Oh, I had this piece like this," and they'll describe it, and I'll say, "Oh, right, I love this." And without even walking around to talk to it, I'll remember bits of it and I'll reflect that. So they know I care about what they're looking at. I care about what they did. And they didn't all win, of course. They can't all win. Occasionally somebody's not in there. But yeah, I don't know. Now I'm spinning out a little bit. But, oh yeah, just so talking to everybody. And then I announced the winners and I talked about each one of them. And I said what I thought was really nice about this. And everyone seemed to appreciate it, winners and not winners. So I've been, ever since then, going and talking and meeting the people and seeing what that is. But I did want to say, when you're submitting things, just because it's not in, there really is, we're given a number. We can only do so many things. We have to, and I want it to be as good a show as possible. So sometimes when I'm down to those last few things and I have to edit something out, then I'm just looking across the board. And it's not that this isn't a good piece, but we're already down to the numbers, and I'm just looking what's coherent. And sometimes something sticks out different than the rest in a bad way. Sometimes you want a variety, of course, but sometimes it just doesn't fit with what else is going on and for the cohesiveness of the show. But yeah, I've talked to people that came up and said, I didn't get this in, and I still say, oh, I love that piece. This is what it is. I'll tell them another gallery, so it's worth going. All right.
I thought of a couple more things. And first of all, as you know, like having been on both sides of it, I personally love speaking to the people about how the choices were made and reminding everybody, you know, just because your piece did not get into this show does not mean anything, you know, that, like I said to you before, like seriously, take to heart how you want to grow. But I've seen jurors, there are times where a juror, I don't hear anybody here talking about it, and I don't feel it out from having seen shows. But sometimes a juror will bring their own bias to the jury process. Like I work really hard to try to make sure, that's why I have like a list of criteria, and you know, like quality and mastering isn't the whole thing. It's like the painting has to have life to it. It has to have something. I will probably never say yes to something that I end up saying, oh, that would make nice wallpaper. You know, it's got to have more to it than that, the technical side of it. But I've seen jurors bring in, you know, like their own bias. They only really like photorealism, and they were told that they have to jury in a couple of abstract also. So that kind of weeds out everything in the middle. I've seen jurors who hate a particular color, and you can't escape that. You can't intellectualize that away. On the other hand, I've seen jurors who also, like I work with metal leafing. There's jurors who hate metal leafing. They won't look at my work, and that's okay, it's not their thing. I also, one time, I was at a very prestigious international show in Wisconsin. It was a huge event, and the people who put on the event, they had lots of socializing for the artists, and these are international artists, and once you get to a certain point, you end up doing jurying if you're interested. One of the ways to get in started is by asking, like, hey, how do you bring in jurors for the show? I would love to jury the show one day. So that's how I ended up, doing some of the jurying that I've done. So I was at this table with a whole bunch of people, and I said, all right, I'm going to ask you guys a question. How many of you jury shows? And everybody's hands went up. And I said, well, now that most of them are online, tell me this. Tell me that you're not looking at the screen and you're looking at 200 to 1,000 JPEGs, depending on the size of the show and the prestige of the show. And you're looking and you get blurry. Oh, there's another landscape, there's another landscape, there's another landscape. And then your spouse or someone else says, hey, what would you like for dinner? And the finger keeps going. And I asked the question and I sat back, and every one of these people at the table, there were 12, I think, it became very animated. And the same as I started to tell the story that the very first time I juried a show, I was the accidental juror, and I basically juried on what I liked and I didn't like. I would never jury like that now, and I wish I could contact those people who didn't get in and say to them, hey, I hope you were okay. Hope that didn't cut you down. Food for thought.
Thank you. I had a question and now it's gone. How, and this can be for any of you up here, how has jurying affected how you see your own work and applying to shows or entering, submitting work? Has it done something to heighten you? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'll pass it over in a second, but you all addressed something really great about that early on, just going to shows and seeing, or visiting who the curator is, or visiting what the show is and seeing what that gallery does and having a real good idea. Does your work actually fit in there, and have a good sense of, self-actualizing, and, so you're not submitting to something where it doesn't fit you. But I've done that too, and I've not been included in shows and I've gone in to hate the show, and and still walked out and said, no, mine was, but no, I agree with what you said earlier. Like, I do come out with something, but I'm still going in, but it's for my own challenge. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to get into this next time, or I'm going to, what was there? What am I lacking? And I do answer that. How about you guys?
I would say, for me, getting into shows or not getting into shows, I feel like it's always kind of a humbling experience in a way where, like, if I do get my work accepted, I feel like, all right, now I got to live up to it, and like elevate myself, I guess, to I don't know, to be worthy of my work being shown. I don't mean that as self-deprecating as it sounds, but I think anytime you receive any sort of accolades or honor or whatever about your work, or compliment or anything, that always makes me feel like, all right, I've got to step it up or live up to this compliment in some sort of a way. And kind of the same goes if not being accepted, then obviously that has that sort of effect, like, okay, I gotta just keep working on my stuff and make it better next time, And as far as how jurying shows has affected my own work, or curating shows, I mean, anytime I see people whose work I admire, which is anytime I'm curating a show, really, because I'm choosing artists whose work I admire, it's always inspiring in a way, not in a direct way of like, I want to do something more like that, but just inspiring to see people who are doing great work and, I think anytime you see something that you like or admire or whatever, it makes you, I don't know, it elevates you in some sort of a way, if that's saying anything.
You also made me think that seeing people, this doesn't count for the blind jury shows because we don't know who the person is and we don't get statements, but in the shows where you're submitting something, and I'm not saying work looks the same, but when somebody has a great couple of sentences that just gets right to the heart of what they're doing so that someone else, because we all think our work, like, there it is, it speaks for itself. It doesn't always. And if a couple of sentences can really say something poignant about what you were doing that a potential curator can read and have that, it does help. It helps underscore. It sets it apart from things that might look made in a similar way, but it just adds a little bit. And I learned that by seeing people like our work is similar, but then they've got a little statement, and I wished it was my statement, or I thought, oh, that says that so perfectly, or I see the subtle difference between what you're doing and what I'm doing. And if you can put it in words, it's really helpful.
Yeah, that's super, super relevant. Like, I can definitely think of multiple occasions curating a show where I saw the piece and I thought, either I liked it or, it had some kind of reaction enough that I wanted to go read the artist's statement, but it maybe wasn't like an immediate, like, oh my God, this is so incredibly well done. This is like a for sure yes and goes in the pile, but enough where I was like, okay, I'd like to see something more. Read the statement and was able to go back and see something entirely different in the work after reading what they had to say about it that really elevated that piece to make it an absolute, like, yep, that's in the yes pile. So again, just like really, really, really trying to push this one home, like being able to eloquently talk about your work in a exact and precise manner, not just your artist statement. And obviously, like, you don't want to prattle it off like it, like it's from memory, like a robot, but just have a couple sentences you talk about your work. If someone came up to you tomorrow and said, what's your work about? If you don't have 2 or 3 lined up sentences, very concise about what your work is about, you need to go home and figure that out. You need to write those things down. You need to pare that down into just a few sentences that you can say, this is what my work is about. This is the heart of my work. But I wanted to go back just a second to one of the earlier questions, in regards to like yeses and nos. So I don't do a lot of the big shows where, like the kind of big group shows where it's everybody gets a piece in or whatever. I tend to be a little bit more, the shows that I do are much more selective, unfortunately. And yes, that does absolutely affect me. I feel like a monster usually by the time I'm done curating, like knowing how many artists are going to get no's. And, I'm not impervious to the impact that has as an artist myself. I get no's all the time. I know what that feels like. But the yeses for me also, which ties into the statement itself, is your art has to say something. And I think that's where a lot of artists who are confused about why they keep getting no's and no's and no's, they're trying to submit their work, which is like a well done piece, but it is largely very decorative. Like it's beautifully put together. You have skill as a creator or a renderer, but it's not saying anything. Like a beautiful picture, of a sailboat, like depending on where you're coming from, why you're painting that, what your story is, like it could just be a sailboat, or like it could be an entire like Odyssey-esque journey you want to take someone on that sailboat. It has to be something more than decorative, and that is your role as an artist. Like you are a cipher. The world around you is happening. You are taking everything in. You are funneling it through your own lived experience, and the work you're creating is a manifestation of the way that you understand the world as it exists around you. So if I can't look at your work and go, what in the hell has that person lived through? What is their life? What are they trying to talk about? Like, if it doesn't pique my interest in that way, then largely what you're making is decoration. And there is a distinction between decoration and art. And if what you want to do is decorative work, there are a lot of shows out there that are for decorative work. So know the calls you're submitting to. Know the kind of work the galleries show. You can look at the track record of galleries and go like, okay, yep, no, they're looking for more conversational, contemporary type work. That's what this gallery largely shows. As someone that's doing mostly decorative kind of pieces, this is probably not a gallery that's gonna give me a yes. So know the gallery, know what your work is about, and say something with it.
All right. I got a few pragmatic things I want to mention, and then I'll answer the question, because I'll forget my list of pragmatic things. Pragmatic things on entering a show. One, like Anna said, make sure it does something for you. Don't just enter everything, and don't just put your work scattershot out there. Make sure that the jurist is somebody you want them to know who you are. The gallery is a place you want to get your foot in the door. It's something that'll do something for you and your art career. Two, don't submit giant pieces. As a jurist, I usually throw those out immediately. And giant meaning like 5 feet or more. Yeah.
Don't tell me that.
If it's a vertical, it's okay, but otherwise you're kicking 2 or 3 people out of the show, is how I look at it as a jurist. 3, see, now I'm going to start forgetting. Titles. They can help. In fact, the show I'm in, that I just have, the game show, I'm not exaggerating, there's 2 pieces in there that they were in the maybe pile until I saw the title, and then they became definite yeses. I don't know, should I give it? Yeah. Okay, so one was a really great painting, but I didn't understand how it fit the theme. And it was John Paraglini, or how do you pronounce his last name? Yeah. I mean, his stuff's gorgeous, but I didn't know how it fit the game show theme. It was this guy in a suit with like this really smudgy face, until I saw the title, and the title was The Game Show Host. It's like, that makes perfect sense, and yes. And then another piece was a painting of a skeleton and next to this covered wagon, and I didn't get it until I saw the title, and it says, "You died of tuberculosis."
Wow. Like,
Do you? Yeah, now some of you get it.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's this game. Maybe you don't know Oregon Trail. It was an educational game. Yeah, and pretty much everybody died of tuberculosis in that game. So again, it was like perfect for the theme, and it was like that just vaulted him right into yes. So titles mean something. You can do untitled. That's perfectly fine. Don't try to do too much with the title. Don't say like, "My soul's expression," or I don't know. Don't try too hard.
Be clever.
I just hurt somebody's feeling with that. I just don't. But yeah, do something with the title, or just use untitled. So
I know one artist who has sometimes ridiculously long titles to his work, but when you see the work, it has to be like that.
yes.
The one exception that I know.
And I forget my last thing. So now I'll answer your question. I know. Oh yeah, I know. Some people will disagree with me, but most galleries, when they give the work to the jurists, give them in order that they were submitted. And so therefore, if you submitted early, you're going to be one of the first pieces that they see, which actually usually works in your favor, but because by the time they get to the end, especially if it's a giant show, they're tired.
They're oversaturated.
They're tired, and they've already seen a lot of portraits, right? They've already seen a lot of landscapes. And so it's got something that stands out from everything they've already seen. So entering early actually is a benefit. Not all galleries do that, but most galleries give it to the jurist in the order that it was submitted.
I'm going to ask you a question. I'm seeing more and more calls for art where they have an extended deadline. Right? So what are your thoughts about that?
That tells me that they didn't get enough entries.
They didn't get enough, or they didn't get enough quality entries.
Right. So if you're, because I had, a few of us had a conversation about that. It's like, do you submit if it's one that you thought like, nah, I'm not sure I'm going to, or it's very common, like once you really start submitting to a lot of shows, and the more and more enveloped you are by your art career, you'll have a show that you want to submit to, and before you know it, the deadline has slipped. You go, oh shoot, I meant to, So if you have a show in mind and if it's on that list of, oh, I meant to, oh look, they've extended the deadline, then what do you do?
I mean, if you're submitting, that's a good sign, because they need more work.
They need more work.
And so that means there's not 1,000 people that have entered already.
Yeah.
So that's a good sign. If that's a show you really want to get into, I would do it. Yeah.
And that's actually another good point. So, hold my mic. I have had that same problem, just being a little scatterbrained about like submission deadlines sometimes. Get a planner and write them down. That's what I do. And now I never miss it. I'll like put, and because I also know myself and know that I procrastinate everything, I just say I work well under pressure, but I will put, like if the deadline is, the 4th of December, I'll put the 1st of December is the deadline, and then I've given myself a little cushion. It's like a little game I like to play with myself. But I just literally, I have my daily planner and schedule, and you can use your phone if you want to, but like when you see a show, if you can't just like drop what you're doing and submit right there, but you want to submit to it, write it down so you don't miss those things. That actually changed a lot for me. Like I stopped missing deadlines because when I started doing that.
Yeah. Life can get in the way. The other thing I'm thinking about, we bounce off of each other well. It takes time to fill out a submission form properly. Depending on how much they're asking for. Sometimes a bio is asked for. I've been guilty of sometimes skimping on that and think, well, hope the work is strong enough. And it's not always. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So make sure you're being thoughtful about what you're submitting. Don't just submit something, especially if the show has a theme. Sometimes the theme is, really locked in, and sometimes it's just like a weak suggestion, and you don't know which one it is when you're applying. So take the time, fill the form out properly, sit with it, and go through your strongest work. Don't try to second guess what the juror's going to pick. You're like, oh, well, I know Clinton's work. He likes this kind of architectural urban landscape. Oh, I have one of those. He'll choose mine. You're like, don't do that. Unless that's honestly your best painting for that call. And then apply that to like all the other calls.
I'm actually going to add a little bit to that because I got my own mic. We're good. Being a photographer, I was looking for jurors. This is back before I actually started understanding the art world. I was looking for jurors that were photographers because I figured I would be a shoo-in, and I didn't get in any of those shows. Not because my photography wasn't good enough, but there was probably other ones that were better. But I was misconceived with thinking that because they did the same medium, they would take my stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I also wouldn't overdo like researching the jurists and trying to figure out what they like and then submit that. Submit what you want to show. Submit what you want to show. I don't know. It feels cleaner.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, like, even if I'm curating a show and I've handpicked the artists, say I've got 5 artists, and I say, hey, we're doing a show, after they've said yes or whatever, then they'll be like, well, what pieces of mine, what do you want me to bring? What kind of stuff? Is there a theme, whatever? I always just tell people flat out, like, just bring your best work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is always kind of the simple, easiest answer for me. Just bring your best work, Yeah, don't try to like appease the curator or try to fit in with the other artists or whoever.
Yeah, don't overthink it, but also, backtracking a little bit to what Cheryl was saying about like, writing your bio, like putting some thought into it. Don't just like send off, don't be lazy about your submission. Take the time to do it properly, but also it's my opinion and something I tell like young artists when I'm talking to them and doing, lectures and talks. You should have this down. Like if you have not taken the time out of your life to write your bio, your artist statement, a synopsis of your work, like you should have this. When I'm submitting now, and that's not to say it's the same thing, like, as my life changes or the work develops or takes a new direction or an interesting change, like I'll go back and revise the way I'm talking about it and reread it and make sure it stays current to what I'm working on now and new things that have come up, as the years have gone by. But there's a solid, sheet of paper on my computer. If I'm submitting, it's like, okay, that, Word doc gets open, I'm cutting and copying and pasting things a lot. And because this is essentially what my work is. I've already written it down. It makes submitting to things a lot easier too. Like, especially your bio, like you don't need to change your bio. Like you were born where you were born, you went to school where you went to school. Like you should have this written down somewhere on your computer where you can copy and paste sort of those sorts of things. And then as you're submitting and the time goes by, like reread your artist statement, update it and revise it if you need to, but it should also, hopefully you're not doing a major directional change in your body of work where you would need to completely scratch that bio and write it from, nothing again.
Repeat that at the microphone.
Well, you should always have a statement ready to go, but it should be a living thing, I would say. Like I feel like I kind of tweak my statement with every single show that I do, because your work should be evolving too. Like if I saw your work 5 years ago and I see your work tomorrow, I'd want to see some sort of evolution in the work. So your statement should reflect that.
We're now going to open up for questions and answers from you guys.
Yay!
When you were talking about looking at works on Instagram, what kind of things do you think people should write about? Because I read all these different things about what you should include, trying to get somebody's attention for your work, and it's very confusing. So what do you guys look for as far as the, what's written about the work?
Personally, I would say not too much. Yeah, especially on, especially on social media, especially on Instagram. If I'm looking at something, it's the piece itself that grabbed me in the first place. And if there's a little paragraph or whatever that says what it's about or what you're about as an artist, that's great. If I'm scrolling down and it goes on and on, I'm definitely not going to read the whole thing unless I'm super fascinated and I want to know everything. But I would say those are rare cases. But a few snippets about maybe what a piece is about, what you're into as an artist. Title.
Do you have to do search engine optimization get with Instagram? I'm not on it. I'm not at that stage yet, but I'm just wondering if you have to do that type of thing in order to get your work. It would be landscape if you're doing a landscape painter. Do you know?
So like
You
hashtags.
can hashtag.
Hashtags, like, do you have to do that in order to make your work be more accessible?
Instagram is always changing how hashtags and things like that work. They just did another huge change. If you, one of the ways that some artists would be followed is by certain hashtags, and they are no longer going to make it that you can follow a hashtag. So, like however you do decide to use Instagram,
just make sure that the photography is good. I've been guilty the last couple of months, but I've had some health issues I'm recovering from that I've basically abandoned, and it's going to cost me, because the way to really get seen is to post regularly, and the algorithms will pick you up eventually. It's not the same as it used to be. Instagram, I think curators look more at Instagram.
Well, when you're looking, when you initially go look, like I like to look at artists on Instagram, do you put in a hashtag or to look for new?
I never do.
How are you?
I know some people do, but I personally, I don't.
Like you want to see new artists or whatever?
A lot of times it comes down to following different galleries.
Oh.
Galleries and, things
And
like
then
that.
new people pop up.
Right, new people pop up and it's sort of a rabbit hole. You can go down.
All right.
Very big rabbit hole.
Yeah, I'd also say I've never been on Instagram to specifically go just like randomly find artists. It is what I think Instagram is the best use of that as a tool is how you connect and network with other people. So go follow other Detroit artists whose work you like, go follow the galleries you like, go follow the curators that you'd like. Comment on their work from time to time. Like, again, don't be annoying, don't be like desperate about it, but be engaged with their content. And it's when they start to see like, oh, this person likes all the things I post, and they left a really lovely comment about this last piece I was working on. Like, that's when I'll be like, oh, who is this? And I'll just click on their profile, and every once in a while I'm like, holy crap, they're really good. Like, where have they been this whole time? Or it'll be like tagging other artists, like just recently, like a friend was in a show and she tagged a couple of the other artists she took photos of. She liked the pieces in the show and like tagged them in the post. And one of the pieces was like, oh, this is really gorgeous, and like their tag was right there, so I could just click it and go look at that. That's unfortunately, I think the best way that Instagram gets used is not anything you're doing specifically. It's just how it creates like a network that connects people. And then also there will be times like I'll click on someone's profile because I like their works. They've been tagged in something, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, we have like 100 people in common. Like, who is this person? And now I'm like invested, now I'm interested, now I'm scrolling through their pages. But back on statements, unfortunately, I'm actually going to take the opposite opinion from Mike. You don't need to write a long diatribe, although that is something I'm very guilty of. Like on my posts, it's all laid out there, and I would say like I do fairly well on social media. But for me, I think what people respond to, what you write, no matter if it's short or if it's long, make it deeply authentic. It should like have something to say. It's just like the work itself. It needs to be saying something. Don't just put noise out there, because we are living in a cacophony of noise at all times. Have something to say that is authentic and meaningful to you. Speak about that and be real about it. Like a lot of the work I do, some of it's very hard to look at, some of it is, like a little bit disturbing. I will talk about those things. Recently, like I was with my father, and I've been making work about that, and I'm talking about the grief, I'm talking about this process I'm going through. Like I'm making the experience of making the work an understandable experience for anybody else who's experienced this grief. And then I'll post these pictures, and now I've got an inbox with literally 30 messages from people like, oh, I lost my dad a couple of years ago, your work really spoke to me, because I'm just being really real I'm being very authentic and very forward about what I'm feeling and why and how that resonates in the work. So if you need to be long-winded like I am to do it, then do it. I don't think you should put a rule of like, keep it short and sweet. Like, well, if you're not saying anything short and sweet anyway, then it doesn't matter. But if you have something to say and you need some breath to say it, like take that breath and just be really real about it.
I'd say a good test is, could AI have done this?
Oh, yeah.
And the reason why so many artists are going to AI for artist statements is because so many artist statements sound the same. And so why not just have a bot do it? And so, that would be your test, to be, is this so personal and so honest that no AI bot could have possibly done this, then you're on the right track. Yeah. And if you have the word juxtaposition, then you're
How often do you think people should post?
Daily.
We have a question on
My question is, you read the title, sometimes on entry thingy it has, before you're putting in your photos, there's how does your piece address the theme? How is it connected to the theme? So I wrote that, and then after when you put in the size and things like that, they put description. They say what's the description, describe this piece. And I thought, since it's asking for the size and media, that they're asking what is it in case they're trying to find it or it's lost or whatever, So I would put, it's a vending machine, whatever it is, so you can identify it somewhere else by that description. And then the pieces get in, and everybo's got these little blurbs about their piece, and mine says vending machine. It doesn't say, it was a connection between food and American diets and things like that. I went on for 2 sentences, wasn't much, but I thought it was fine. And then I get there and I'm going, wait a minute, this person's right. So what, I'm wondering, do you actually read the stuff that's there about the piece?
You mean in the jury process?
Yeah.
For me, it's like I look through yeses, nos, and then when it's getting to that nitty gritty where I
That's
have
what
to
you're looking
decide,
at.
that's when I'll start to, break between.
Okay, so it's probably the gallery's fault. That,
Yeah, they were really unclear. That's not their fault.
not very
They should
clear.
have been more clear
Yeah.
what they were looking for.
Okay, thank you very much.
I want to add
You
one more
could,
thing about
when
it.
in doubt, you could always call,
Yeah.
or email. There's usually an email available.
Right.
There's a couple times where I had some reason to either ask a question or the website glitched. Cheryl addressed that a little bit in the beginning. I applied to a show and the pay button went, thank you. I only hit it once. So I sent an email, and
To make sure.
I had a pretty prompt response. That's why I'm bothering to say that. So if you're not certain, communicate.
Okay, thank you.
I'm currently in a show at Cranbrook right now of recent purchases. So the curator, this is a curator with it, so they're curating from their collection. And they said, okay, we're going to have 2 parts of the show, and anybody, and it's all Detroit artists that are collected, and they said, write your thoughts about Detroit, like what it means to you. And I thought of it for a little bit. I'm like, it just hit me as like kind of hokey or cheesy, and I never came up with something. I got to the show, it seems like no one did it. So that little thing wasn't on there. They just had the titles and whatever their statements were, but sometimes you don't need that stuff. So, you could have said later, oh, let me change this. I've got a few words to say, or I'm fine with any.
We have a question at the back here.
I have a question. So far, we've been talking about local galleries, and it seems like it's more in person where you're the curators. But how do you feel about the big online associations as far as Oil Painters of America, the Portrait Society? Those are a few things that a friend of mine recommended joining, which I did, and they have a couple times a year they have polls for art for members only. How do you feel about those competitions? If you have an opinion.
It's a good question. Traditionally, when you're building your CV, it's good to have some of those memberships on there, and certainly if you get selected into any of those shows, and for sure if you take any kind of prize, including honorable mention, it really is a boost on the CV if someone looks at your CV. I think what some jurors for like some of the, I think, bigger, more international, like the blue ticket shows, they're looking to see, and sometimes even the smaller galleries, they're looking to see how involved you are in the arts. For whatever their reasons are, they want to know that you're a steady path, you're reliable. You may not yet be a collectible artist, but you're on the path to become one. So there's all kinds of reasons for it.
What do you mean by
So
how
it's a good
involved you are?
Well, there's some people who, they're really strong hobbyists and their work is beautiful, but maybe they do like only 1 or 2 pieces a year. There could be like really famous artists also who only do 1 or 2 pieces a year. Vermeer didn't have that many pieces. So his productivity wasn't, and maybe today that wouldn't fly. Today's world, there's so many people.
Being more prolific is a higher.
Well, not necessarily even prolific. Like, are you? What are your dreams for yourself? It's there's no, I don't think, any steadfast answer to like if your work is in a show, you have a price on it. How many people? Most people, I think, buy because it fits what they're looking for. It speaks to them emotionally. But some people do want to know that your work is of value. And if they check out your website, and there's like, I don't know, are they even really part of the art world? That does happen. I did the Franklin Art Fair a couple years in a row, and there were people who saw me the first year I did it. I'm just re-entering doing them. I haven't done them since 2012. And 2 people bought from me this year who said, I loved your work last year, but when I saw you again this year, I knew I could invest.
So your amount of sales, does that affect whether a gallery, your CV building, per how much you sell with galleries, or they probably?
I can't answer to sales because sales is a really funny, sensitive thing. But in terms of, I think, and you guys can speak to this, like when you're looking at an artist's work and they're in the maybe pile, and some curators or some jurors might say, they're not really a serious artist, but this other person is, and they're both really powerful works. So I'm going to say yes to this person because that it's important to them. I don't know. You don't ever really know, but it never hurts to say, like, I'm invested in what I'm doing.
Let me say one really quick thing, still shift here, but be very cynical about the international and national jury shows because it's also a big money maker. And if they are advertising, don't do it. They're just trying to get as many people to enter as possible. Your chances of getting in are really slim, but your money means a lot to them. So just I don't know if that's the kind of thing you were talking about, but I just wanted to caution everybody about
I
that.
think there is an international competition in one of them. Because once you join, you get emails, so it's just a money making.
Well, OPA has, they have regional, and they have workshops, and they have all kinds of different ways of being involved. And that's when the networking element of it will help.
Yeah, I'd say that the organizations that maybe have conferences or different kinds of gatherings, you're going to get more out of that than just being a paid patron, right? Yeah. So,
Cheryl, early on in the beginning, when you talked about writer juror, you mentioned that some companies curate work in their buildings. You talked about the Southfield Insurance Company. How do people find out about those?
Word of mouth, being
Word of
around,
mouth. Yeah.
talk to people, let them know. You're like, hey, I mean, the way I ended up getting that space was I let people know, hey, I'm looking for opportunities to find a place where I can show work, not just my own, but for other people as well. And, you know, it's like, it's like, I put a footprint of like, this is who I am, and this is what I'm interested in, this is what I'm looking for. And I think, you know, like maybe it's an oddity in this area, but I think the generosity of spirit of like, oh, that's what you're looking for, you know what, I know I know somebody, I'll get back to you. You know, maybe you'll forget, and maybe like next time you see me at an event like this, you go, oh, right, I was going to get that name to you. So a lot of it is just putting yourself out there, and you know, this kind of thing, you know, like what you're doing, helping build more community for artists. You know, just the more ways you can tap in, the more it's going to happen.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm not an artist. There are 5 of you up there. If we were to look at your Instagram pages, we would see 5 different things. Well, one of the things that I look at with what I do is when I look at a piece of work, I think not of using a hashtag, but using metadata to say, well, this represents this, and this, and this, and this, and then it can help you to write the statements that you need to write. Because I'm sure that all of you have different Instagram presence, correct? I mean, you've all looked at each other's, obviously. Okay, thank you very much.
yeah.
You know, I mean, like as far as like looking at everybody's Instagram, I mean, like now I will. You know, I think that some of the people here.
Yeah, I mean,
some of the people here. You know, so like, you know, like every time you meet somebody, it's an opportunity. My daughter has an artist who she follows. She loves her work. We happened to go to an opening that was in New York, and that artist happened to be there. And my daughter struck up conversation with her. She's like, "Oh, I've looked at your work." My daughter was like, "Oh, really?" Yeah. This is someone who she adored, and again, because she had been following. So like, fluke, or you know, it's just like, you start following and looking for what and who you like, and I think the algorithms do or don't work for you. I don't even count on that. Just create the presence that you want for yourself. Follow the people who you want to be in touch with, and constantly grow it.
And like stuff.
Yeah, yeah, always.
Yeah, I mean, to see who likes things, and then I sometimes I'm like, oh yeah.
Can I get the spelling in? You have 2 Sniders. Is it Schneider and Snyder?
Mine is Snider.
Okay. What's your first name?
Clint.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Clint.
We get this all the time.
I know.
That's why you've been sitting next to
That's
me.
right.
Say it
No,
again.
it's like, are you wearing flannel? Yeah, yes, I'm not going to wear flannel.
What kind of spelling?
SNI.
Oh, okay. And the other one?
Chris.
Chris. SCH.
That's CHNEI.
Oh, okay. Got it. Thank you.
Now, which is the better Snyder now that you've looked at her?
You
No,
just
choose
sold
one.
You're both different and wonderful.
We just sold on Duma Shells last night.
Do you know who bought it?
I bid on it.
I bid on it.
Did you?
I got it back.
Did you really?
I did.
Congrats. I missed it. I would have bid you because I missed it.
Oh,
It still went way under than it should have.
yeah, that's what I thought.
That's why you did it.
Yeah. I think, did you know that him?
No.
Hanson, I think he passed away.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that work was from him.
Yeah.
Jamie.
That sounds familiar.
And that's how it's done.
And so when you bid on your own work, and then you got it back, or you just bid on it to raise
I got it
price?
back. No, I got it back.
Was that your intention?
Yeah, no, it was listed. I didn't know. I mean, when someone said I saw your thing on, it was coming up for auction. I'm like, what? What is it? It's happened a couple times, and when he said what the piece was, I know this guy, and he was really. I feel like I don't know, but I suspect he does this with every artist. He's very personal. He had it framed and like really took interest. So I thought he probably passed away because I don't think he'd be getting rid of it. You know, other people, whatever. But so that I think that is the case, and they listed it a lot less than he paid. So I thought, well, maybe I'll get it back. So I'm kind of excited. Sorry. Thanks. Yeah.
Do you have any more questions for jurors? Anything jurors want to end with? Any last little tidbits?
I just kind of want to go back to something you had asked before. I would never, I don't think, consider an artist's track record on sales when I'm curating a show. Like, if you've submitted something, I'm not going to be like, is she selling anything? You know. But it's
there is a business side to it. I wasn't sure. I'm new to this whole thing.
I'm sure that there are galleries and curators who would do that. But
I heard, now I don't know, I heard that New York galleries, maybe this is put some out in this way, but they're asking you, who's your list? Like, who are you bringing as a client list? Where are you going to consider your client? So, yeah. Detroit's a little different.
I don't know, add on to that, that is one of the things, if you are in a show, make sure you're sharing the show yourself. You're giving it to your people, because we're responsible for bringing people in, but you as an artist, having stuff in a show, you are equally responsible for having people come and attend your show.
that is a super good point, and that's kind of goes back to something that we were talking about earlier, where like, what are some of the red flags about people in shows, and we talked about like, non-communication or anything. That's a huge one, but also if I've curated 5 people into a group show, and 4 of them are hyping the heck out of the show, and there's another person who has never posted anything about it, and they post other stuff regularly, not posting anything about the show, it's like, I'm not going to put that person into another show, because you've got to bring your own people, whether it's just if you're just starting out, maybe it's just your family or whatever, but you've got to be telling people that you're in a show, come to the show, come to my opening.
And another way social media works, and I manage social media for a couple of accounts, especially when it's a show you've been accepted into, go onto their social media and support those posts. And because every time there's activity on the post, you know how sometimes you open up your social media and you're like, there's that post again, why do I keep seeing it? Right? It's because every time somebody likes it or comments on it, it pings it back up on the top of everybody's feed. It's called bumping. So if you want to help promote your own show that you are in, go on the gallery or the curator's website, or all their social media, and make it your habit to support them, because you're supporting yourself.
All right, well, I want to thank all of our jurors for coming. We can wrap up. And this video will be on Mouse House Gallery's website and Facebook in the next couple weeks. So that is for those that could not attend, or if you missed anything during the talk, you can refer back to it. Okay.
Thanks for having me.